This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We are back at it again, post-NBA trade deadline time. A lot of stuff happening as teams start gearing themselves up, trying to position themselves for the playoffs. And, the other teams as well, too, getting themselves ready for the offseason. So a lot happening, a lot to discuss. I'm going to roll out the red carpet from my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are you well rested and recouped from our NBA trade deadline show?
I'm all good, man. Thanks so much for asking. Salute to all the fans of NBA Baseline. Thank you for tuning in. Another great show on tap. A lot to discuss, regarding the second half of this NBA season. Man, I'm excited to jump right in, brother.
All right, man. Well, hey, one of the things I think that's very, very, very poignant about this part of the season is, even though it's a handful of games, when there are moves that are being made, a lot of these trades, you kind of get this sense of the feeling, how much urgency is there in order to get these pieces in place, to get them acclimated, and to yield the results that some of these teams want. I think that's going to be one of the bigger questions in our expectations and what we're looking forward to. So a lot to discuss. In a little bit, our segment of The Drop, we're going to talk about the big move that wasn't on the basketball court as much as it was off the basketball court, with the Los Angeles Lakers hiring Magic Johnson as the president of basketball operations. How that dynamic is going to play out, very interesting, and I'm really curious about Shaw's perspective from this. But also in our breakdown, we're going to give you our expectations about this stretch run, this final run on this part of the season. Who's got it made and who's going to be lamping in the shade when it's all said and done. And of course, I covered it coast to coast, where we discuss the news happening in the association. So to all who is welcome and have been listening to the Baseline NBA podcast, we appreciate you. Sit back, relax, download, and discuss is our mantra. We definitely love covering all of the hot button topics of the NBA. Be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. We're available on all the major platforms. We're available on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, and also the Roku channel. But now we're also on iHeartRadio. So definitely check us out. You can also catch our NBA podcast through the 16 Wins a Ring website, one of the premier website that discusses the NBA, great NBA content. And so definitely catch us on that front as well, too. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. It's time now for the breakdown. Time to break it down. Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And the subject for us is with reference to this stretch run, the remaining 30 some odd games that are still remaining in the NBA. And let it not be said that when moves are usually made by the NBA trade deadline, usually moves that are made are to shore up teams that have positioned themselves to be in the playoff picture. But even some of the trades where teams are not even in the playoff picture may have an impact on how the rest of this NBA season is going to go. So, Shaw, for our expectations, we're going to break them down each within the conferences and respectively within the divisions. So let's go ahead and start first off with the Atlantic Division, which by all accounts, you can make the argument that the Atlantic Division had the most movement when you look at what the Toronto Raptors did to shore up their lineup, who the Philadelphia 76ers moved, and what the Boston Celtics, New York Knicks didn't do by the trade deadline. And oh, by the way, the Brooklyn Nets also made themselves a little relevant to some other teams in the NBA as well, too. What are your expectations for this part of the season when it comes to the teams out of the Atlantic?
Yeah, what I'm interested to see is really just, does Toronto end up catching Boston, for that seed in the division, and potentially a number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference overall, maybe in a number 1 seed, depending on what happens with Cleveland. We don't know. I think that's probably the most interesting to watch. But also looking at Philadelphia with Embiid being hurt, and not really sure on what his status is going to be. Then also, something we'll talk about a little bit later on too with Ben Simmons. Really, do they fall back now? Because I was surprised. Look at the Sens; it's either one game behind New York, and I don't know if that's a credit to Philly or an indictment on New York, or if it's just a little of both. Those are things that I'll definitely be watching, in this Atlantic Division through the rest of the season, and to see what happens in the buyout market, especially for a team like Boston who didn't make any trade deadline moves.
Yeah, I have to agree with you really almost on all accounts, Shaw. One thing that I will add on to this is that, no matter what happens, the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics are going to be the two teams that come out of the Atlantic Division, and where they situate themselves as far as the Eastern Conference playoff seedings go, I think will go a long way in really kind of outlining or outliering the whole thought process about the Toronto Raptors going after it in their own way, and then the Boston Celtics not going after it, and where the chips fall, and how we're looking at Masai Ujiri and how we're looking at Danny Ainge. And to me, I think that that's also a depiction about the organizations moving forward and the decisions that have to be made up at the top just as easily as you make those decisions with what you're putting on the basketball court. With reference to the New York Knicks, look, I didn't expect this team to have their wins and losses flip flop as egregiously as much as I'm seeing how bad this organization has been run through the course of this year, when the expectations were is that they should be able to be at least stable and competitive. Right now, it's just absolutely dysfunctional. And then when you look at the Philadelphia 76ers, listen, man, we just fresh came off of a podcast, our boys with the Driving Dish podcast, where our man Kevin Refuse just straight up went all in on Brian Colangelo. I don't know if I'm going to be as harsh about Colangelo. I will agree that Colangelo does tend to confuse the mind at times. But more importantly, I do like the fact that he's recognizing the writing on the wall, and he's got to get rid of all of these excessive players that really are not going to be a part of that future, whatever that future is, so you can get some kind of clear depiction about what's going to happen. And then if you're the Brooklyn Nets, this is Sean Marks' project, right? We've seen Sean Marks do some successful things previously before with the San Antonio Spurs. The only thing that we can hope and wait and see is that whatever it is he is trying to do is going to lend credence. I am disappointed, though, that he didn't figure out a way to move Brook Lopez. And so, again, these bottom teams, they're going to continue to bottom out. Will they help bolster the Toronto Raptors and the Boston Celtics with their remaining games to keep pace with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who undoubtedly, again, might find themselves as being the top seed in the Eastern Conference?
Right, and I think that's a great point in terms of I have to really break down the schedule in terms of understanding how many games do they have against each other kind of throughout. New York is weird though, because I feel like they can sneak up and beat you at times, if they put things together. But again, they've had just an awful season. And as you alluded to, part of that. What did he say on the podcast with the Driving Dish? The Holy Trinity of crappy franchises: New York, Chicago, and Sacramento. Right now, the Knicks are a pain in the ass for a lot of teams out there, but they're a pain in the ass to themselves first and foremost.
Yeah, definitely not the tri-state, but the triflate is probably the better way to describe those teams. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we set expectations for the remaining part of this NBA season. Let's go ahead and talk about the Central Division, Shaw. Look, Cleveland Cavaliers, full control, at least 10-game lead over the second place team, which surprisingly is the Indiana Pacers. And I'm really surprised by that, Shaw, because you know how I am. I thought that the Pistons were going to take a step forward, and even the Milwaukee Bucks. But again, we didn't know what the circumstances were going to be with the Milwaukee Bucks because of the injury to Chris Middleton. And then, you see what happened to Jabari Parker. So I know that this team is going to struggle on its way through. I still think that they're going to have a fairly a respectable season, all things considered, and they have a future ahead of them when you actually pair up this possibility of Middleton, Antetokounmpo, and Parker. But the teams now that are just jockeying, I guess, for self-respect in some sorts, the Pistons, Bulls, and the Pacers, when you look at the rest of the way that this is shaking out, do you see any of these teams, positioning themselves to be in the playoffs? Right now, the Pacers sit sixth, but again, they don't look like they didn't do anything drastic as far as moves go. But, we've seen this happen with Larry Bird holding on to pieces maybe too long and not just moving forward with an organization. It could be a long-term disastrous effect in the short term.
Yeah, I agree, and like I said, that those last three teams in the Central Division, They're still all technically in it. Milwaukee is a team that I probably like the most, but they're just too far back. I don't think that they're going to be able to make up enough ground. Giannis is really having to carry that team on his own right now as Middleton still kind of works his way back from injury. Michael Beasley's done a pretty decent job as a spot starter since Jabari's been out, but I just don't think they have enough. And Detroit has just been disappointing all season long. They don't seem to be happy with Reggie Jackson anymore. Andre Drummond has definitely taken a step back from season ago. And we already talked about the Bulls and what's going on with that organization. I feel like Chicago is the team that will probably still get in. I did pick them to be, a 7 or 8 seed to begin the year. And I think they just do enough to kind of, meander their way through the season and probably get in at one of those lower seeds, which could still make for an intriguing matchup in terms of marketability for the NBA. Wade versus LeBron in a first round if the Bulls get in at 8. But the rest of this division, again, it's not even say it's top heavy. It's one team, and then everybody else just falls behind them.
Well, Sean, I want to go back to your point about the Detroit Pistons. If we were to put an ideal scenario out there about the Detroit Pistons making a run and possibly putting themselves in a position to be in this playoff in the playoff pictures for this year, who would have to be the MVP? Like, who would be the X factor, the person that you can rely upon to help them get to that point if you don't think that Reggie Jackson is that guy?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at point guard play, we've had a lot of discussion through our few shows here, and Keith Smith said that they really believe in Ish as the guy right now. But I don't even know if that's the case. I really feel like it's guys like KCP and Drummond himself who really need to step up and continue to progress. I think KCP battled his injury, but he's a very, very solid basketball player. And if he can be a guy who can give them something on both ends of the floor, and not say carry them, that's way too much of a load for him to handle. But be that X factor, if you will, as you alluded to. I think this Pistons team can really find a way and find a group to get in and sneak in there. But again, it starts with Drummond. He needs to be more dominant offensively. He's doing a great job on rebounding as always. I think his defensive numbers are a little bit skewed to some degree, but he needs to be able to get the ball and really dominate throughout games and not just for pockets of games, if you will.
All right. And then final question before we move on to the Southeast, Shaw. Who of these teams do you feel like is going to drop off and really disappoint on their way, disappoint, throughout the rest of the remaining part of the season? Like, who basically falls off the table?
Well, off the table, I don't know if any of them fall off the table completely. I mean, we talked about Milwaukee a little bit, and I just don't think they have enough. So, I mean, maybe that's the team that you're looking at. I keep saying I was never high on Indiana. Like, I just didn't see it. I just don't like the mix there. I'm not completely sold on Paul George as the franchise guy, and I'm definitely not sold as Nate McMillan as the head coach. Again, I know there's a lot of love for Paul George. I love his game overall, but there's something in his mentality that doesn't stick with me. So I'm not that high on the Pacers. But in terms of falling off, it probably is Milwaukee simply because they just don't have the horses.
Yeah, I would love to see Milwaukee maintain, but it's going to be very difficult for them to be able to do that. But again, to your point, Shaw, there's not a lot of separation when you look at the teams like the Pacers, Bulls, Pistons, and even the Bucks to some degree. It'll be interesting because I believe that the Bucks are going to have more of an impact against teams like the Pacers, Bulls, and the Pistons if those teams are actually serious about trying to play their way into this Eastern Conference playoffs for this year. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and talk about the Southeast Division. And hey, look, man, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. No, I'm maybe this will be the last time I talk about it because I really do believe that this team is definitely going to make their way into the playoffs. And whether people want to believe it or not want to believe it, the Washington Wizards, I think, have really surprised people, not just because of the slow start to this miraculous turnaround that they've done leading up to the All-Star break and maybe after the fact. It's really how well this basketball team is playing, because I don't think the expectations were that this team had the capabilities of playing at this high a level. Now, when I use the word high level, I'm talking about this in comparison to them understanding the landscape of the conference that they're playing in. Most teams, they know that they're good and they're okay with just putting themselves in a position to give themselves a chance. But I've been saying from the very beginning that continuity and chemistry matters. And at some point, if these guys get past whatever their internal issues are amongst each other, and you get a good coach with the right temperament to guide these guys and focus on the things that they can improve upon, this team, from a talent perspective, can be as good as any of these other teams that are out there in the Eastern Conference. And the difference is they have upside. When you look at the rest of the other teams in the Southeast Division, Shaw, teams like the Atlanta Hawks and the Miami Heat, these teams as well too have actually surprised a lot of people. And it's funny because I think we would have been talking about that with teams like the Charlotte Hornets, who've actually been a disappointment so far this year.
Charlotte has been really struggling, especially as of late. They started off hot. Everyone was like, "Oh, we misjudged them and we wrote them off too soon." And they basically crashed back to earth. And Washington was the exact opposite, where a lot of people were high on them, but as you alluded to, very concerned about their chemistry issues, whether with John Wall and Bradley Beal, whether that would work out. Scott Brooks coming back into the NBA fold as a head coach, but it has, and they to me are one of the scariest teams in the league, and definitely within the Eastern Conference. The Miami Heat, man, all they do is win. I guess, as they would say, with Khaled and them down there, it doesn't seem to make sense to me. They've actually caught and passed the Knicks and the Milwaukee Bucks in terms of wins as we record this podcast, and that's absurd to me. So you talk about a team that's really found a groove in terms of built chemistry and really rallying behind their head coach and Eric Spoelstra. If he's not going to win Coach of the Year, but at this point right now, he has to get some votes for it, because what he's doing with this Miami Heat team is absurd. This is not a good basketball team. You cannot convince me this is a team that should have 26 wins right now, but yet they do, and they continue to move on. And they're going to be a problem for teams in the Eastern Conference. So if you see Miami in your schedule, you can't just chalk it up and say, okay, well, that's a W. You're going to have to come to fight and really play hard if you want to get past them. And they can really have a role as a spoiler, if you will, in these Eastern Conference seeding picture.
So moving forward, though, are we buying into the fact that this is going to be a basketball team that can improve on what they've done this year? Like, one of the things that I look at, Shaw, is no matter what this team does towards the end of this season, it's all about building the morale if they don't make the playoffs and giving optimism for fans about what they should be looking forward to. I have no doubt that people are looking forward to Hassan Whiteside, right? I have no doubt that people are looking forward to Josh Richardson. And they're also looking forward to Tyler Johnson. But what I guess I am more concerned is, are they buying into the Goran Dragic's? Are they buying into, the plan per se by Pat Riley? Do they have faith that Pat Riley himself is going to position these guys that not tanking and not putting themselves, in a lottery situation is going to be the best thing for this team moving forward, because they are confident that Pat Riley is going to pull the trigger in the offseason to make this team better if they continue to run the way that they're running?
I think they're going to maintain with what they're doing for the most part, yeah, and then try to get better this summer through free agency. They're obviously ruining their potential stock in the draft this year, with all these wins. Remember, Justice Winslow is going to be back next year too, so that's an added piece that they've been looking to build around as well. It's ironic to me, because you just would have figured this is a team that would have to rebuild and be sellers at the deadline, but they didn't make any moves. They didn't sell, they didn't buy either. So Riley was like, you know what? Whatever, let's just ride this good wave out, see what happens, and then they'll try to improve through free agency over the summer.
All right, you're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we discussed teams and their seasonal expectations. Before we jump off and talk about the Western Conference teams now, Shaw, what are your thoughts about the Orlando Magic? They didn't do any moves at the trade deadline. We talked about that in our previous show. And ultimately, right now, even the product that they have on this basketball court is not really giving you a lot to go off of. This is one of the few basketball teams that can't even score 100 points per game. And so there's no fun factor in what we're seeing. And clearly this team is struggling. What are we going to make of what's going to happen for these guys the rest of the season?
There's not much to make of it. They're going to just play Terrence Ross out, see if they have a true player in him. They're going to give the plus minutes to Aaron Gordon and try to get him to develop at that power forward position, which a lot of people think is his natural position to begin with. And then it's just going to be about talent evaluation of some of the young guys. You'd like to see, my dude Hazonia get some run. They'll be looking at Elfrid Payton very hard. I think they've already made up their mind on Vucevic that he's probably not going to be a major piece in their future for whatever reason. I think Vucevic is a very good player. He's just fallen off under the tutelage of Vogel for whatever reason.
And I'm still surprised that Vucevic did not get moved to some other team. I just don't understand the thought process with that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is probably asking price. Again, what we've talked about, kind of through the different shows in terms of, what you think the market is, wasn't what it really was, especially for buying teams, if you will. So I think those are players that they're going to revisit, but they have some expiring deals on their roster. So this Orlando Magic team should look extremely different going into next year. You expect them to be extremely active at the by the time the draft comes about, trying to get rid of some of these guys and maybe acquire some more picks.
All right, let's go ahead and switch gears, Shaw, to the Western Conference teams now. First in the Northwest Division. Look, I got to tell you, I'm really surprised, for the way that some teams are playing, and I'm really actually shocked by how disappointing some teams are playing. I mean, it's so extreme on the scale of how you measure it. You look at a team like the Utah Jazz, who I think are who are exceeding their expectations already the outset of this year. And my question to you is, do you see them dropping off from what they're doing? I mean, currently, they're basically 14 games above 500. And then on a complete opposite end of that spectrum, the Minnesota Timberwolves, a team that, listen, I'm not expecting this basketball team to do like the Los Angeles Clippers or to play, to win at the capacity of even the San Antonio Spurs or anything like that. But what I was expecting them is to be a roughly 500 and above type basketball team. And they have been anything but that this year. I mean, how do you account for, those two extremities and really all that falls in between?
Yeah, it's tough for me with Minnesota. I was definitely on the bandwagon and sipping the Kool-Aid a little bit. I love the talent of Karl-Anthony Towns. I believe in the coaching acumen of Tom Thibodeau, the development of Andrew Wiggins, and I really thought this was a team that could have and should have taken strides to be a lot better than they are. As bottom feeders in the Northwest Division, if they can somehow get maybe 12 to maybe 13 more wins, to eke it out this season and be a few games below 500 as opposed to 10 games, 12 games below 500. I think that would be an acceptable whatever last quarter of the season or whatever part we're in currently right now. But this Minnesota team is definitely disappointed, and you want to see what Thibodeau does now going into the summer. Draft picks and free agency. Can they recruit? Is Karl-Anthony Towns a guy that people want to come and play with? Which I assume he is. Young talent, great big out there. So I think that they'll be fine for the future, but very much disappointing. But Utah, I don't think they're overachieving. I think, well, you know what? Let me take that back. They are overachieving based on the amount of injuries that they've had. I think everybody said if this team could stay intact, get everybody healthy, that this is the type of Utah Jazz we'd be looking to see, fighting for a home court advantage in the Western Conference playoffs, if you will, and challenging for the lead in the Northwest Division. And they're doing exactly that. But the thing is, they haven't been 100% healthy. Hayward's missed time. Favors has been in and out of the lineup all season long. George Hill, who's been great when he's played, but he's been in the season. Been in and out. Alec Burks just came back recently as well too, and they still have found a way to be at the top of this division.
Well, I think the thing that I think stands out for me, especially with how this team is going to continue to play moving forward, is the way that they are matching up against the other teams in the Western Conference. I felt like even if the Utah Jazz do make it into the playoffs, that they are not going to be mentally tough enough to be able to deal with the top tier teams in the Western Conference. But when I've watched them play against teams like the Golden State Warriors, teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, teams like the San Antonio Spurs, they have been competitive all the way through. I'm not worried about what they're going to do against teams like the Portland Trailblazers, if the Trailblazers made it in, or maybe even the Oklahoma City Thunder to some level to degree. Although you could make the argument that because the Oklahoma City Thunder has a Russell Westbrook, you say to yourself, what do the Utah Jazz have? I just go to the fact that as a team collectively, they are going to be a tough out because they play great team basketball. And sometimes great team basketball gives you an edge in a 7-game series rather than what you're looking at through the duration of an NBA season.
Yeah, and it's going to be important for them to just get some playoff experience under their belt, as a unit to really kind of figure out where they're going to go from here. And I think this is going to go a long way in determining whether or not Gordon Hayward stays. He's more than likely, it makes no sense for him to opt into his deal. He's going to opt out so he can get, more of a max deal and get more percentage of the cap, if you will. But then does he stay as a result of a great run in Utah? Again, it's kind of dual-fold because they haven't been there before. So if they end up with home court advantage, what do they do with it? If they get to a second round, I can't see Gordon Hayward leaving on them. But if they get in and they get embarrassed, if you will, losing 4 or 5 games, then there's a very good possibility he could leave. So a lot is hinging on them getting into the playoffs and how well they perform.
All right, let's go ahead and quickly touch on the Oklahoma City Thunder and Portland Trailblazers, Shaw. Oklahoma City Thunder, listen, what more can be said about, an argument could really be made about Russell Westbrook being the MVP. I know all eyes are on James Harden, the remarkable season that he's having, but you could also make the argument that even with that trade of getting Victor Oladipo, this has still been all about Russell Westbrook because by all accounts, Victor Oladipo has not lived up to the hype. And it surprises me because, this guy had a lot of momentum coming in, especially doing what he did to put himself in the position to be trade worthy, so to speak, for the Orlando Magic, like to move him before moving Vucevic and any other particular pieces, and for the Magic to say that we're willing to keep Elfrid Payton instead of Victor Oladipo, I thought would have been fuel to Oladipo's fire to really come out and play the kind of basketball that made him a lottery pick. But he has not done that. And to the credit of Russell Westbrook, this basketball team still plays about 8 or 9 games above 500 and is very much in the throes of the middle part of the Western Conference playoff picture.
OKC is an amazing story. You know how they've kind of just maintained, post KD, as you alluded to. Westbrook's season is one for the ages, if you will. I was watching the game the other night, and he said he has 24 triple doubles in his career. That happened within 3 quarters. That's absurd. There's many people who don't have 1 or 2 triple doubles at all. He has 24 within 3 quarters. So he really has been the straw that stirs the drink here for OKC, and they continue to move forward, even with Oladipo having kind of a subpar season, as many would have. I think you're right. Everyone expected him to really break out and be that dude here and be the kind of the 2B guy next to Westbrook, and that hasn't happened. But you see the move that they made at the trade deadline. They are gunning for that home court advantage. They're trying to come for Utah and even in the division, and I like the fact that they're going for it. Sam Presti's not going to rest on his laurels and say, woe was me, we lost KD. They're going right after it. And regarding Portland, they to me they're not as, obviously the record-wise they're not as disappointing as Indiana, but those are 2 teams that I just felt were overrated going into the season. There's something about that Portland team. I thought, yeah, they were able to surprise teams last year, but there's no way you're going to sneak up on guys again. And they overpaid a lot of those guys. You saw them being sellers. You even heard some conversation that they entertained Damian Lillard trade rumors and talks. I don't really believe that per se, but the fact that's even coming up goes to show you where this Portland Trailblazers team really thinks they are right now. They're going to have to re-up and really reevaluate over the summer.
Yeah, things like really turned astray for this basketball team in the course of the big losing streak that they had during the first quarter of the season, and it's just weird. It's like they have not recovered from that, and look, they've got to definitely shore up that front court play. I think they've been flip flopping through intermediate pieces and not really integrated the guys. And this is not to down Terry Stotts. I think he's done a phenomenal job as a head coach, given the pieces that were given to him. But it just doesn't seem like they've been absolutely settled on the players that they've had in the front court. And I think it's going to start throwing out that question. How much longer do guys like CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard continue to hold loyalty to an organization that might not be putting the right parts around to maximize this kind of talent? And I think the other big question is, because a lot of people have been questioning Damian Lillard's play, of whether or not his focus and his heart is truly into doing what he's been doing. And it's just interesting because that's not the sentiment that we got from the Portland Trailblazers over the last 2-3 years. They've been always like that underdog team that everybody seems to overlook, and then they come out and they knock people out. You know what I'm saying? And it's just an interesting, how things have just evolved in a very short period of time. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we get down into the breakdown, discussing what's going on for the rest of these teams for the rest of this season after the NBA trade deadline. All right, let's go ahead and shift gears, Shaw, to the Pacific Division. Look, I don't have a whole lot to say about this division. It's obviously owned by the Golden State Warriors. They dismantle everybody within their division and just leave nothing but bones and skin. It's a foregone conclusion what to expect for the Warriors. What I am very curious about, though, is this Los Angeles Clippers basketball team. We'll talk about the Los Angeles Lakers in a little bit in our segment of The Drop, but I'm really curious about this Los Angeles Clippers team because, to the point, Shaw, we've been talking about how something really needed to be done at some point, and this could really put Doc Rivers and his acumen as president of basketball operations in jeopardy, given what's been going on right there in La La Land.
Yeah, there's no question that this is their unbridled. This is their last run. I mean, this is it. I don't care what anybody says. Yeah, there are reports that CP is probably going to resign there, and that's because he and Doc have a relationship, and he can get a lot of money by doing it. But I think Blake is going to opt out, and he may seek greener pastures, if you will, if it doesn't work out for them in his playoffs. And I mean, work out for them is that they have to at least make the conference finals and be competitive when they get there. Otherwise, it's a done deal, and this team really should and needs to break up. But they still continue to have issues at the small forward position. They've pretty much addressed that by running 3 guards out there and having Austin Rivers go out there at the 3 at times as well too. Mamute is still one of those glue guys who does rebound and defend, but he's just not the answer there. He's a guy that can come in and give you some minutes defensively, but he shouldn't be your starting small forward. They have a lot of issues, and as good as they are talent-wise with CP3, DeAndre, and Blake, and even Jamal Crawford coming off the bench, AJ Redick, all those guys, they should just have always have been better than they've had, and they've had a lot of bad luck, and I get that, but you cannot tell me that this is not the last time we'll see this Clippers organization as it is currently constructed.
All right. So now when we look at the bottom of the division, Shaw, Los Angeles Lakers, Phoenix Suns, among the worst in the NBA, and it's probably a three-way race between them and the Orlando Magic, in some respects, and maybe even the Brooklyn Nets. I'm sorry, the Brooklyn Nets literally have the worst in it.
It's not close.
They're close. So, I mean, what do we make of this? When you're talking about the Suns and in their situation and moving forward, I mean, clearly are they playing for the lottery? And I mean, what are we going to make about this basketball team? Is there any hope that these guys are going to look competitive moving forward? Can they play spoilers to teams like the Kings and the Clippers and really affect where their seedings are going to be in the Western Conference playoff picture?
Phoenix, I don't think so. We've already seen the start of the trend right after post All-Star where they brought Tyson Chandler off the bench. Move a piece that they probably should have moved, as you've alluded to in previous shows. But now they're going to go out there and let the young guys play. Alex Len is going to be the starting center for the majority of the rest of the season. Marquise Chris is going to get some time. Bender, if he's able to come back. TJ Warren opening up times with TJ Warren playing instead of PJ Tucker now. Now Tucker's in Toronto, so Warren will get some time. Bledsoe, Booker, all those guys, they're just going to let it run with the young dudes and see what they can make of it. And yeah, they're shooting to try to get the second worst record, if you will, so they can have the second best chance because no one's going to be as bad as Brooklyn is. And the Lakers are kind of going to be in the same situation as Phoenix.
All right, so let's go ahead and finally talk about the Southwest Division, which I think right now is the most competitive division in the NBA. All across the board, teams like the Spurs, Rockets, Memphis Grizzlies, Pelicans, and Dallas Mavericks, all positional, all within the playoff picture. Listen, I'm just utterly surprised by the play of the Houston Rockets. And, I just think that there's no question Mike D'Antoni is going to wind up getting Coach of the Year honors. I think James Harden is clearly on the path of winning the MVP. But when you look at it for what it is, are they going to be a representation of being the best team out of the Southwest Division? And especially after getting Lou Williams on that roster, what is that saying for teams like the San Antonio Spurs and the Memphis Grizzlies, who for the most part have been the more dominant teams in that division?
Well, Houston is one of the great stories in the NBA this year, and I agree with you. D'Antoni is going to be Coach of the Year, all things remaining equal, if you will. I think they'll probably just fall short of a game or two, kind of where they are right now in front of San Antonio. The only way that changes is if the Spurs decide, you know what, it's not important, we're going to rest guys. But they just got Gasol back, and I think they'll be looking forward to alternate their rest. They won't take out 3 starters at a time, if you're saying, and kind of just punt on games. I think they realize that it's better for them to have home court advantage. But Houston should be chasing them throughout the entire season. They've made moves specifically in mind and with the acquisition of Lou Williams to kill it with fire, as I keep saying, in terms of a potential matchup with the Golden State Warriors. But as currently constructed, they'd have to get past San Antonio first and then eventually get to Golden State in a conference finals. But I love what the Rockets have done this season.
All right, and then let's talk about the Dallas Mavericks and the New Orleans Pelicans. The big trade, DeMarcus Cousins paired up with Anthony Davis. We saw what this duo could do for a front court perspective. Clearly does not address the fact that this is among one of the worst teams defensively in the NBA. And, it's a big, big problem when you look at this because I think it's more an indictment on Alvin Gentry and what he's going to have to do in order to fix that problem. I mean, as great as a front court as you can have, if they can't stop the opposing basketball team, it's a moot point. And then with the Dallas Mavericks, they got what they wanted in getting Nerlens Noel. There's still a couple of games out of that 8th seed. Is it realistic for either of these teams to position themselves to take either the 7th and 8th seed or possibly one of these teams possibly overtaking the Denver Nuggets and moving forward to playing in the NBA playoffs?
Yeah, I think Dallas is a little bit too far out of it, and then they're going to have to integrate Noel into that and figure that out. They've just cut Darren Williams, so now it looks like Yogi Ferrell and Seth Curry are going to be the guys there. And you just don't know what they can do in a stretch run, per se, in terms of trying to chase a playoff spot. I think they're just going to be a little bit too inexperienced to make that run, and they're just too far back from now. And again, ironically, with New Orleans only being a game ahead of Dallas as we record the show, the combination of Boogie and Brow can really cause a problem. They had some issues, obviously, in the first game, but they played the Houston Rockets, who, again, is one of the better teams in the NBA. If those two can really mesh the way that everyone thinks they can make a push, but it's 3 games, if you will, and was it 4 teams in essence that they have to or 3 teams they have to overcome? That is what the issue is. I don't know how many of their games are left against the Nuggets and the Trailblazers, the teams that they're chasing. So if they can get some head-to-head matchups where they can gain essentially two games on on it by winning against those teams, then maybe they make a push. But I think it's still Denver's to lose. And real quickly, didn't touch on the Grizzlies. You really wonder why they didn't do anything at the deadline. They still need shooting. Chandler Parsons is just a shell of himself. And I'm really concerned about this Grizzlies team, but they just kind of sit in the middle of the pack, him and Hong waiting to get things done. But I'm just not convinced that they'll be able to make any playoffs.
Yeah, well, I alluded to the fact that I'm surprised that the Memphis Grizzlies didn't make some kind of play, didn't add some kind of piece. This is a basketball team that I think is going to suffer scoring the basketball in certain spots and certain stretches. And it's kind of a shame because as competitive as they've been against the Golden State Warriors, Shaw, you can clearly tell that this is not something they could sustain through the course of a 7-game series if it goes to 7 games. And so it's a little bit disappointing. We've been talking about this ad nauseum. We've had our man Joe Mullinax at times when he's come on board and discussed the Memphis Grizzlies basketball team. And this is a basketball team that they seem to just float above the median. But they don't do enough to supersede themselves, to give people a broader look at seeing the potential of a team and what they could do. It's like they tease us just enough to say we're okay with being good, but we're afraid of being great. And that's a disservice to an organization that has really been equally successful as we talk about most teams in not just the Southwestern Division, but also in the NBA particularly. The Memphis Grizzlies have been a playoff basketball team year in and year out, but yet they just don't seem to make the kind of moves, the impact moves, that's going to help them project a better area of where they're going to wind up ending up when the season ends.
But they thought Parsons was that move, and and they missed the boat there for sure in terms of him not being fully back from his injury. The fact that we're 50 plus games in the season, he's still on a minutes restriction. This should be very concerning, for this team, and you can't expect him to magically turn it on come the playoffs. And if he does, great. But I think that has been a true hindrance for them. And again, I can't knock them for making the move because Chandler Parsons has been fooling guys now for 3 years in terms of, hey, I show you a little bit of something, look what all I can do, but I'm only going to do it, for maybe 10 or 15 games a year.
Yeah, and I was the biggest Parsons, supporter, back in the day. I felt like this guy was, he's surprisingly going to be like a box office guy. I'm not going to say he was going to be superstar status, but he had the factors in him. He basically to me was like the Justin, like if you had Gordon Hayward and Chandler Parsons, on the same boy band, Chandler Parsons is your Justin Timberlake. That's that's what he is. I mean, he is.
Isn't his nickname Very Handsome or something,
something
like that? So that's probably accurate. But again, he's fooled some people with his talent, if you will. And again, the talent is there, but the health isn't, and that is huge factor for this Memphis Grizzlies team offensively.
All right. Well, listen, all things be considered, it's still going to be an interesting stretch run for the remainder of this season. There's some definite competitiveness going on. That Western Conference 8th seed teams bolstering up their rosters. It's going to be great when teams like the Pelicans and Mavericks clash in, within their own division. And Denver Nuggets now obviously wanting to play a role in that. And even the Sacramento Kings and the Minnesota Timberwolves to some degree might play a factor in what's going to happen and how things shake out for the remainder of this NBA season. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And look, never let it be said that the Los Angeles Lakers do not find a way to make themselves headlining, all right? They love getting up in the headlines. Maybe for all the right reasons, and maybe to some people it could be for all the wrong reasons. But let it not be said that Jeanie Buss does not love her Lakers. Love it so much that she is willing to part ways with her brother from handling anything basketball related with the Los Angeles Lakers. And a complete firing sale went on earlier this week. And look, Shaw, I have no qualms about it. I think it was long overdue. Mitch Kupchak gone. Jim Buss gone. I am surprised, though, that first you hire Magic Johnson to be an advisor, and then in a blink of an eye, he suddenly becomes the president of basketball operations. How does that? I mean, I get it. Loyalty matters, and the most iconic face for the Los Angeles Lakers in the modern era. You got to make sure that he has his hands in on things. But do you think it's a little too much giving him the reins to be president of basketball operations?
Um, that's gonna have to we have to take a wait and see approach with it. I just don't think it's as subtle as maybe it would seem. The timing is a little ill-fated. The fact that it happened 2 or 3 days before the trade deadline, so that was the alarming part to me. But what it boils down to is that once they made him a special advisor in air quotes here, in January, the writing was on the wall that I think Kupchak and Buss were like, oh snap, you know what I mean? Like this could really be. I think they had kind of a wink wink agreement with that Magic was probably going to take over at some point. But what it seems to be, and from all the reports, are the fact that Marcus Cousins was available and the Lakers did not capitalize on that move. By giving up Brandon Ingram or whatever parts that Sacramento could have given them or asked for rather. That was the straw that broke.
The fact that the Pelicans were able to get DeMarcus Cousins for a Devin George and half a ring finger for Robert Horry could probably tell you everything that you needed to know about where the Lakers mindset probably was. I think probably more so, Shaw, is what wasn't being said. That again, we talk about the trade itself, but it's what didn't happen for these other teams that I think became the biggest indictment. If the Lakers are not even in the conversation, you're not looking at the news ticker and seeing Lakers, Celtics, Grizzlies, like those teams that have opportunities to try and do something, whether they've got the assets or not. The fact that the Lakers are not in the runnings for a big, which they have been so notorious in doing. They did that with Dwight Howard. They've done that with Shaquille O'Neal. To not be the conversation for the best big man in the NBA, I think was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, I mean, they were in the conversation. They just flubbed it up. It's just what it boils down to in terms of, not being willing to part with Ingram for reports.
But it didn't take as much. It didn't take as many. To me, it didn't have the headlining impact that you think that it would have. Like, I would even think that it would have lent credibility to Mitch Kupchak, that he was proactively looking for this deal to be had, and maybe to some degree Jim Buss. Even if they fell short and failed, just the fact that I didn't hear it as loudly as what I'm used to hearing from the Lakers whenever they want to be involved in a deal, to me, I think was an indictment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it definitely was for Jeannie. She said, "Listen, you know what? Hey, what the hell happened here? This was a potential candidate for us and somebody that could have changed our franchise around, and you guys didn't get it done." So I think internally they were very upset. And if you're seething and you're about to bubble over, and you see something like that happen, then you're like, you know what? Peace, kick rocks, everybody out. And now they brought Magic in, and there's some jokes on Twitter about we need to call it like a franchise right now and see if he can pillage some of their assets. And for the most part, he's playing good soldier in terms of like, let me build a team, let me gain an understanding of it. Traded Lou Williams, got a first round pick out of it, which is obviously great for them in this year's draft. Even though it will obviously be in the later part of the draft with Houston being as good as they are. But nevertheless, I think this Lakers team is really going to evaluate. But he's saying that he's with the slow build and let me evaluate. I think that's BS. I think if they have an opportunity to get good and get good quickly, they're going to absolutely do that. And even if that includes selling a D'Angelo Russell or Julius Randle or even a Brandon Ingram, because you heard the rumors about Paul George and all those things. They made some overtures for him pre the deadline. If Paul George ultimately wants to come there at some point, then they're going to try to trade for him this summer so that they can have his bird rights and be able to retain him at a decent salary, and then therefore try to make moves after that, because you're not going to bring Paul George there to be a rebuild. They're going to try to go after it immediately. So Magic he's on the hot seat to some degree, but he's put himself there in terms of like, you know what, I'm gonna build slowly, but he's trying to get this team turned around extremely quickly.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment of the drop is we're talking about the Lakers. Bold moves made. Jeannie Buss up shot and wreck shop with the Lakers organization and puts Magic Johnson as the president of basketball operations. So let me go ahead and come back to the point that you were just making about Magic Johnson evaluating and assessing the roster that he's currently working with and saying the slow build process. So there's two questions I actually have from this, Shaw. My first question is, how much faith does Magic Johnson have in Luke Walton to be able to help turn out this process of what Magic Johnson envisions in this Laker future? And how much are you buying into Magic Johnson with the current talent that is on this team? In other words, is Magic Johnson feeling a D'Angelo Russell? Is he feeling a Julius Randle, like, and a Lance and Larry Nance Jr.? Like, I'm very curious, because you know how sometimes the old regime are. You know,
Yeah.
they have a depiction, they have a vision of the type of player that they want. And they got to be cut from their cloth. And sometimes they spend way too much time trying to get that player
Mm.
rather than trying to build that player. I mean, we see that now, right, with Phil Jackson and the way that he's running the New York Knicks. And I fear at times that some of these young players, while they have the potential to be great and are seeking their own identity, it could be at the detriment of someone like Magic Johnson, who's been there and done it, but has his way of seeing how a player needs to be for that organization. And that could mean that there are players that people may like that they won't get used to liking because Magic Johnson already has them in the doghouse.
Well, he said it came flat out and was like, "Listen, this can't do the Showtime Lakers." So he's saying the right things in terms of like he doesn't want to take an old school approach to building this roster. He wants to really evaluate, and I think they have assets out there that team would like. But I don't think anybody's untouchable, and that includes Ingram. I just don't think so. I think he's like, listen, if we can get good and we can trade 2 or 3 of these guys, and then bring in established superstars, then that's what he's going to do. But for now, he's like, let's just wait and see. Listen, what the Lakers have to hope is that Magic the tweeter isn't the same thing as Magic the president of basketball operations, because his takes on Twitter are very general, and he said a lot of things about some very average players out there that haven't panned out. That's why he went and got a guy like Rob Pelinka to come in there and help, who understands, has great relationships around the league, but he understands the landscape in terms of development of players and what players can actually be worth. So they're going to work very intentionally and do it the right way, I think, for the most part. But it starts with the evaluation of their own talent, as you alluded to. And I think they have the utmost faith in Luke Walton. I think he's going to be a part of that process in terms of, talent evaluation, who they bring in. They want to bring in guys that he can mesh with and coach along with, and really cultivate into the Lakers culture, if you will. I think this is going to be a good move. Magic is a name, more so in the way in terms of having good relationships. Obviously, Phil Jackson in New York is a huge name, but I think Magic is a name that still resonates with players in that of itself, because a lot of people grew up watching Magic. And that should get them a seat at the table with some of these free agents out there and say, you know what, let me talk to you about this Laker culture. Then you bring in a guy like Rob Pelinka as well too. Let me tell you about LA and all the great opportunities that are here for you. All the things that they missed out on, in trying to sell LaMarcus Aldridge and Carmelo and anybody else who they entertained in the last few years. I think Magic and Pelinka are going to do a little bit better job than Kupchak did.
How shrewd of a move is it, Shaw, to have Rob Pelinka as the general manager? Because to your point, I do see the potential and really the upside of having a guy like Pelinka as a GM. I think that the one thing that doesn't get talked about, so to speak, the elephant in the room, and we alluded to this on our boys podcast, the Drive and Dish podcast, was the fact that with what's ever happening right now, the climate that's taking place, on how agents are having an impact on how deals are being done with the organizations and with the players, that for Magic Johnson, I think that he made this as a progressive move as well, too, because now he has the ear of someone who has played in that forum more times than often and has successfully landed deals for marquee basketball players. And so now to have someone on that side come over to the organizational side, I think also gives them the inside track of how they should be approaching some of these players moving forward, especially in a very high volatile market like Los Angeles.
Yeah, it absolutely does help. I mean, it was in Detroit, the same thing happened. That guy left his agency, and listen, just because you divest your interest, that doesn't mean you don't have a relationship anymore. So now all those players that you may even have, with clients on, on different teams, well, listen, those are still his guys, if you will. Now that he's in LA, so he has a better chance at getting some of those guys to come over there because they know him and they know kind of what his worth is. Again, this is a nice move for the Lakers, and I think, we have to give it time to see how it works itself out. But I think they're going to take a turn for the better a lot quicker than maybe they even are kind of alluding to.
Well, one thing that I am definitely looking at is how Magic Johnson is going to fill out the rest of the organization, who he's putting in place, because I think that's one thing that we didn't see from Phil Jackson. I don't know if a lot of that was still controlled by Jim Dolan, but I do know that with Phil Jackson, he has not shown the propensity to continue to put the people that I think he needed to have put in place. Steve Mills, that guy should have been gone a long time ago, right? And so, it's those type of things that we look at that we say, dude, does Phil Jackson really know what he's doing? I look at Magic Johnson, and Magic Johnson has put himself in situations from a business perspective that is one, it's either made him very successful, has put him as a profile type of guy, or two, if it's not been successful, he's not the one to take the absolute fall for it. He puts it on the shoulders of the people that he thinks are most qualified to execute the things that he's expecting to have executed. One last thing before we kind of tie this thing in a bow and hand the presents over. Where do you see everything falling into place for Kobe Bryant and his role under the Magic Johnson regime?
Kobe's going to be a special advisor, probably very quickly, and have some input into this. I think Magic is going to reach out without a doubt. And that remains to be seen, kind of what that means. And if Kobe wants to come back and be involved in that level, because he's a hard dude to deal with and negotiate with and to even reason with on a regular basis. That could be, hit or miss one way or the other. But I think they're going to at least reach out and see what opportunities are there and try to kind of form this super brain trust, if you will, in terms of their administration and management up top. You have Kobe, you have Magic, you have a guy like Pelinka involved in there and that organization. That should have some really resonating star power with other free agents around the league. But again, you just don't know if that's the right move one way or the other.
All right. Well, listen, it has begun. The Magic is in the air. Will that produce one of the greatest shows on turf, on court, being that the Los Angeles Lakers replace themselves back in the throes of one of the more formidable basketball teams in the NBA? We will wait and see, but all eyes are definitely on Los Angeles. So we'll definitely be anticipating that. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop. Coast to coast. Coast to coast. Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
What's beef? Beef is Shaquille O'Neal and JaVale McGee. Beef is Paul Pierce and Draymond Green. What is going on with the players in the NBA and these guys on the sidelines, brother?
I love it. I do. I think it's great, conversation to have on the side, as you alluded to. And it seemed to be all pointed and directed at Golden State one way or the other. Draymond is, he's prickly. I don't know what you're doing, barking at Paul Pierce on the bench.
No doubt. I mean, he is taking the name of his podcast to new heights right now.
So I definitely want to tune into, his next pod and see if he addresses these.
He may try to kick it up a notch. He may kick it up a notch.
Yeah, I mean, but leave the OG Pierce alone, man. But saying that he wanted a Kobe farewell tour, like, you're not Kobe, like that's harsh. Paul Pierce is a certified, bona fide Hall of Famer, and maybe he's not getting the farewell tour that Draymond is kind of alluding to, if you will, but let that slide. But regarding Shaq and JaVale, man, that you talk about some beef to everlasting, that's never gonna die. And the fact that the Warriors have now petitioned TNT to talk about Shaq keeping JaVale's name out of his mouth, for the foreseeable future, like, that to me is just, it's epic. It's hilarious, and I can't wait to see what happens.
I will say though, I am surprised that the Warriors did do that. Number one,
yeah, right.
I look, and I'm not saying it. I take nothing from the Golden State Warriors, who they are as an organization. They're a class organization. I just think it's the wrong time to be doing that, because one of the things that we continue to keep questioning about the Golden State Warriors are their mental toughness. And at times, it makes them look petty. It's the kind of thing that we used to chastise the Los Angeles Clippers for. So that, to me, it just doesn't look good. I just think it was a wrong play on their part. I will say, though, let me caution this about Shaquille O'Neal. I love Shaquille O'Neal. He's a really cool dude, does a lot of great things. But I got to admit, man, and this may actually be something more TNT has to... Listen, man, this whole thing with JaVale McGee is being played out, bro. Like, I get tired of them having to bring up JaVale McGee. Like, he's been on Shaq and the Fool a gazillion and one times, and even the jokes that they throw out there for the JaVale McGee-ness that happens, to me, is getting dry and lame. So I just think it's going to play itself out at some particular point anyway. I didn't think it was absolutely necessary, but now I'm just glad that it's now coming down to, Shaq now going off on KD. I told you, this is the side of KD that we weren't seeing before, right? I'm telling you, it's the KD kiss of death. Don't get on this boy's bad side in the midst of him playing basketball. He gonna shun you.
Yeah, and he and Draymond are tight, and I think all of them, they are a collective unit that for all the talent they have on that roster, they have this us against the world mentality, which is great. I mean, I think Steve Kerr has to love it that they're that type. But the one thing, as devil's advocate, I'll say, regarding Golden State reaching out to the TNT team, if you will, is if nothing else, it shows other teams out, or other players out there rather, that how much that organization has your back.
Right.
Whether it's petty or not, it's like, listen, they went to, something as ridiculous as this, they went and tried to mediate it on a player's behalf. I think that holds a lot of water with some other players out there. And as if Golden State wasn't attractive enough as it is, I think other teams would be like, you know what, hey, look, even their media has our back, if you will, if we were to get in some sort of beef or some sort of trouble. So I think that it was a show of goodwill on Golden State's part.
Yeah, listen, and let it not be said, have you really heard any ill will from guys who formerly have played for this Golden State Warriors team during the stretch of this quote-unquote dynasty that they're on? Harrison Barnes, Andrew Bogut, and none of those guys are going to complain. They won rings, but ultimately they've recognized that this franchise has looked out for them when other organizations like the New York Knicks, you don't know what they're going to do to their franchise players, so that at least must be a good thing. All right, y'all, let's go ahead and get to some actual news that's taking place in the association. Ben Simmons done for the season. Clearly that foot is broke. It ain't gonna get fixed anytime soon.
That was rough, man.
Simmons is now done for the year. Shaw, what do we make of this the news now that has finally come down the pipeline that he's out for the season?
I think it's unfortunate for the Philadelphia fan base who was definitely looking forward to getting a glimpse of what this team is going to look like with Embiid and Simmons together on the court. That's the main thing, but they have to err on the side of caution. You don't mess around with foot injuries, because 1 year can turn into 2 if you really mess it up. So let him sit out, and hopefully maybe we'll see him at Summer League again this year, and get rested and get right for the next NBA season.
All right, the Pelican brief. I mean, that's what I'm going to call this situation for Omri Caspi, man. He gets traded along with DeMarcus Cousins from the Sacramento Kings to the New Orleans Pelicans. He plays one game, doesn't even finish that game, breaks his hand. He's out for 4 to 6 weeks. And oh, by the way, the Pelicans release him. It's just, I mean, the Pelican brief
it's
like no other for Omri Caspi, bro. I mean, do him dirty. I mean, straight up.
But this is the second time this season that the Pelicans were like, "Oh, you're hurt? All right, well, sorry about that, Lance."
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so it happened to Lance when he, got the groin injury, and now it's happened to Caspi. And again, it really does suck because I think Caspi was an underrated piece in the deal. He was going to be the guy that was going to be able to space the floor for them and help out AD and DeMarcus on the block a little bit. So to see him go really, really is tough news. And we'll see what ends up happening. Our guy Oliver Maroney out there put it out. Well, would somebody take a waiver claim on him, if you will, to pick him up by March 1st? Why not the
Memphis Grizzlies? Why not the Memphis Grizzlies, right?
Pick him up by March 1st, because he has to be on the roster by then, even though he's hurt, but then just stash him. And hopefully he can play his way back into shape for the playoffs. And I think that's a great point that you bring up there. Memphis would be an ideal location for him. I don't know in terms of how many roster spots they have.
Because Lord knows the Boston Celtics ain't going to do nothing, so.
Well, let that lie. But the Grizzlies, I think they just signed Tony Douglas, to a deal again. So I don't know what their roster space is, but Caspi, I think, would be a nice pickup.
All right, welcome back. Jeremy Lin, Chris Paul, Paul Gasol, Enes Kanter, all expecting to make returns. Who is the one that is most needed very quickly to come back on that basketball court for their team?
Chris Paul. That's not even a question. I think, without a doubt, the Clippers are flailing. They're trying to hold on and try to maintain their home court advantage, maintain the top 4 seed one way or the other, and just get back and get their chemistry going, if you will. So Chris Paul is by far and away the most important player to their roster. But Gasol coming back is huge. Even Kanter coming back is great for OKC as they make a push to even catch the Clippers for home court advantage in the Western Conference. Lynn in Brooklyn, whatever. They have 9 wins. So what can you really say about that?
All right. Finally, Shaw, Jarrett Jack is back. I didn't mean that by, putting a pun on Jack Reacher, but Jarrett Jack is back. He is playing now for the New Orleans Pelicans. So I guess that killed all my hopes and notions about Jarrett Jack playing maybe for, the Washington Wizards or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? He's with the Pels, 10-day deal. How solid do you think it's going to be that he's going to wind up being on that roster for the remainder of the season?
I mean, if he's healthy, then it's a great move.
And if they make the playoffs, it might be for more.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely an acceptable risk on their behalf. He can provide guard play at both the point and at the shooting guard. Typically a decent defender as well too. You just have to see how healthy he is. But I like the move for them. Getting a veteran guy there. And the underrated side of this too is if he does end up sticking for the rest of the season, that presence that he could have, kind of controlling, and maybe that's the wrong word, but in terms of maintaining DeMarcus Cousins. I think he's brought in there for as much as his character as he is his actual play and what he means to that roster. Jarrett Jack is one of the most likable guys in the league. I think behind Jamal Crawford, who is universally liked in the NBA, Jarrett Jack is one of those guys, you see him on the sideline, he's always shaking hands, giving dap. Everybody loves that dude. So I think that's another reason that they brought that guy over there.
All right. Well, listen, all eyes now again is pointed to this last portion of the season. Handful of games left to play. It's more about the positioning and seedings, but very interesting Western Conference situation that's happening down there. Who's going to take that 8th seed? A lot of teams have bolstered their rosters to make that run. So we'll see how this all shakes about. Shaw, another excellent show once again. And as always, man, is a pleasure to run with you, ride or die on this whole NBA journey, man.
Absolutely, man. I cannot believe that the season has gone this much away from us already. We're 55, almost 60 games in, and we're really going to be getting ready for a playoff conversation pretty soon. But we've had a lot of great content out there. Our round pod, if you will, with the Drive and Dish guys. Our conversations with Nick Sharia, our conversation with Kevin Smith. We've really been on a roll. Shout out to 16 Wins a Ring. Shout out to NBA Lead for maintaining and putting our content out there as well, man. And I cannot wait to see what the stretch run has in store for us, brother.
Most definitely. So for the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. Be sure to download us on all the major platforms, including our iHeartRadio constituents. Welcome. How you doing? We're ready to talk NBA basketball. Are you? For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We'll catch up with you next time.